I'm Michael Heidinger for Radio St. Rose, and today I'll be speaking with Stephanie Zimmerman, the president and co-founder of My Heart, Your Hands, an organization that helps childhood cancer survivors deal with the long-term effects of cancer treatment. How would you characterize the organization? Is it just for survivors of childhood cancer, or is it for all survivors of cancer?
I would say that the passion behind My Heart, Your Hands is the adult survivors of childhood cancer. However, with the age that people are being diagnosed with adult forms of cancer coming down and down and down and into the mid-20s, early 30s, in particular the breast cancer population, everyone, I think, is going to live to see the long-term late effects of therapy. So the passion and what drove the organization to be founded certainly was adult survivors of childhood cancer, but we certainly are also speaking to the adult survivors as well.
Okay. How old were you when you were first diagnosed with cancer?
It was 1978. I was 8. How old were you?
1978. Well, I guess I would have been 6 years old then.
Yeah, okay. So I was 8. I was diagnosed with Ewing sarcoma, which is most common in children, although adults do get it. And that being said, it's very rare in children. It's a soft tissue sarcoma, so it's a solid tumor. And it was in my left second rib and invaded, actually, my chest wall. And I was treated with chest radiation and multiple chemo medications.
And how long was the treatment?
My treatment started, I started radiation and chemo right off the bat in January of 1979. And I took my last doses of chemo in, I believe it was August of 1981. So it extended over 21 months, almost 2 years.
Wow.
And that was back in the late 70s, early 80s, which, if you look back at the history of the pediatric cancer world, the things that you have to remember are, first, children were not being cured at that point in time. My parents were told that, we can try this treatment, but in all likelihood, your daughter is going to die within the next 6 months to a year. And so what was happening, I was kind of the pivotal treatment generation in the pediatric world because we went forward with treatment as part of a clinical trial, and I was cured. I actually am the sole survivor of the clinical trial that I was a part of back in the 70s. So, and they were overshooting with radiation and overshooting in terms of the dosing of the chemo drugs that I received. And therefore, in my generation, we are probably seeing even more significant late effects than what we'll see in future generations. Does that make sense?
Yes. So they weren't exactly sure what they were doing back then, so they overdid it.
Right. They knew they were looking, they knew they had the right combination of medications. They didn't know how much was enough, and they wanted to err on the side of more than coming in short. And so what happens in that situation is you overshoot and run the risk of long-term late effects.
Do they have that under control now, where they can balance the doses correctly?
They certainly have learned a lot. they have put lifetime limits on the class of drugs that actually caused my heart to fail. And so if you were an individual diagnosed with, the same thing that I had, they would not cross a line with certain medications because they know that crossing that line, exponentially increases the risk of, heart changes, heart failure, and the potential for heart transplant. I mean, it is not an exact science. Clinical trials continue to move forward. I think that the exciting thing is that cures are becoming more and more common among both children and adults. We're not there yet. Some of the most exciting research out there has to do with drugs that can be given to protect the heart, drugs that can be given, basically kind of like a vaccine that combine your own immune system, with an antibody that will be like a heat-seeking missile and go after cancer cells and spare all of your normal cells, normal tissues, and normal, your vital organs. So we're getting there, but we are not there yet.
And in your case, you would have been declared cured around 1980?
No, I would say we didn't start to really breathe deeply again until I was probably 16 or 17. So that would have been 8 years. I have a letter from my pediatric oncologist saying, well, I think that we can exhale at 5 years, but we need to keep an eye on her for what might happen in the future. So, these drugs have been used for years in the adult world, but in an older population, they hadn't seen kids survive, and so they didn't know what side effects might have a late onset. Certainly there's always a risk that the cancer could come back. And that's something that even today I carry a risk that sarcoma could come back. But we started to breathe again, I would say probably 8 to 10 years later. I started to breathe probably long before my parents did. I think that's fair to say. But in my teenage years, I remember saying, I can't go into the doctor for every cough and every cold that I get. I can't live my life thinking that, oh no, it's back. I couldn't do that. And so I actually had a conversation with my parents and said, I need to learn about my therapy. I need to learn about the potentials, and because, I'm 18 going off to college, I need to be able to take care of my healthcare needs myself. And they did. That was their greatest gift to me, was teaching me what I needed to know, because I just couldn't live with CAT scans, once a year. You don't want to always be approaching a CAT scan and depend on that for peace of mind.
But eventually, though, another serious problem did develop.
Yes, and it was certainly probably one of the questions that I get asked most frequently is, did you know this could happen? And I did. I knew from my late teens on that my heart could potentially fail. It was on the consent form that my family, that my parents signed, but I never thought it would. I think that's the bottom line. I knew it could happen, but I never believed that it would. So even though I knew it was a sucker punch, so to speak, because my heart failed very, very quickly. And, it just felt like everything was spiraling, just out of control. Because, I had no control. There was no control over the process that was taking place. It's known to be a progressive process. And in my case, because it involved both chemotherapy and radiation damage, it went very quickly.
And so you basically knew that you were going to have a heart transplant then?
In February of 2008, we were told that short of a transplant, that I was going to die, and that it was going to go very, very quickly. And by that, they meant likely within the next 6 weeks, 6 to 8 weeks.
6 to 8 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And what's the average waiting time for a heart transplant?
Well, the average waiting time at that point in time was 2.5 months. So obviously there was a huge, huge gap there. And as you know, I live in Atlanta, Georgia, and the transplant centers here declined to take my case because I had an open heart procedure done at the Cleveland Clinic just 4 months prior. And given my complicated medical history, they didn't have, quite honestly, they didn't have the expertise or the experience, the clinical experience to take my case, which was a really hard pill to swallow. But because I'm a nurse practitioner, because I've worked in the cancer world for my professional life, I understood why they said no. But I'm not a person who goes down without a fight. So my husband and I researched. And because I had the original surgery up at the Cleveland Clinic, we made appointments to go back and be evaluated for transplant there. Their wait time, again, at that time, was 2 months, and I was scheduled to be up there on April 23rd through the 25th for evaluation. But my heart failed on the 19th of April. So I was life-flighted from Atlanta, and when I arrived in Cleveland, they met with us. They explained to us that they didn't know if they had anything that they could offer. They immediately started my workup for transplant. But they were very clear up front that they didn't know if they would be able to help us. So by the next day, which was, in this case, it was a Sunday, and I was just decompensating very quickly, and our cardiothoracic surgeon said, we've got to do something to support her. If we're going to lift her for transplant, we need to build a bridge. And I'm sure you've probably heard, just in the media, talk about LVADs, total artificial hearts, and things like that. And those were their first two options. But because I'm a very petite person, I could not house the hardware. That would have, quote unquote, bought me a little bit more time. So what they had to do was they submerged me into a coma and placed me on what's called an Ecmo Machine, which is basically a heart-lung bypass machine that is at your bedside, but it's a time-limited support system. So we had 14 days, and each day that passed, my risk of being pulled off of the transplant list increased because of the high risk of infection, hemorrhaging, blood clots, stroke, heart attack, and whatnot. So that was a pretty hard day for us because I had to make the decision to go into a coma knowing that I may never be brought out of it because there was not a heart available. So I had to say goodbye to my husband and to our little Abel and to my dad. They were the three that were there with me. And I think I got a phone message off to my brother. I can't remember. But then I closed my eyes in the absence of a heart and was so amazed when I opened them again and I was still here. But they took me to the OR the very next day and placed my donor's heart. So I was listed critical need, highest need, which is a status 1A, and received a new heart within 36 hours. And the match, if there's a matching criteria, obviously you have to be matched with your donor or you're going to run into problems. And my donor and I, we medically are considered a perfect match.
And I mean, are the odds of something like that, a perfect match, at a dire critical time, does that happen very often?
I don't think so. I don't have the data to give to you. I can just tell you kind of the overall atmosphere of my medical surgical team up there. Everybody was kind of operating in a surreal zone because we were all, and I say we, I include myself, but let's be honest, I was on a ventilator, I was highly sedated. Many of these memories are stories that have been told to me. But I remember as I was beginning to own my memories, thinking, wow, what's going on here? And as the story was being told to me, it was told in such a way that they were like, this doesn't happen every day. And it doesn't happen very often. And I had a couple of things in my favor. One of those things is I'm basically the size of a pediatric patient. So it's not like I could help the heart of a 60-year-old male who weighed 230 pounds. But I could help the heart of someone my own age who was petite like myself. But I also could accept a heart from a pediatric patient. My blood type is also rare. I'm B positive, which can work for you or against you, because if one becomes available, then there's not a lot of competition for it, but the chances of one becoming available are also decreased. And then thirdly, the other thing to consider is pediatric hearts. They go to the pediatric, they're offered to pediatric patients first if there is a match. And with the heart, I don't know if you're aware of this, but with the heart, you only have 4 hours. The phrase that I heard a lot was time is muscle. And so you only have 4 hours to transport a donated heart from the donor and have it seated and stitched into the recipient. And so there's a critical time factor in there as well. And a lot of the match criteria do not come back until 7 to 10 days later. So they moved forward with me because if they didn't, I was likely going to die. And they moved forward on a 60% match between me and my donor. And then as those tests rolled in, they were realizing that the match was so much greater than what they had hoped for. They knew they could, they knew they were good with 60% because of the medications that we have available to prevent rejection of the heart. And they also knew that I was in dire straits.
And for your recovery after the transplant, how long would you be looking at to be, even approach something normal?
Normal? Most people, I would say the answer to that question is probably 6 months I have friends who have received hearts. One actually just went back to work at the beginning of this month, and he is 6 months post-transplant. Because I was so compromised, and because of my medical history, my recovery time was much longer. I was in the ICU 32 days. I was on life support for 40 some odd days. But I watched people who had received hearts come into the ICU and be discharged to the transplant unit 48 hours later. And then they would be discharged from the hospital within 2 weeks. But because I was so compromised and so sick, my hospital stay ended up being 60 days. And then I had almost 30 days of intensive inpatient physical rehab. So my recovery, I had to learn how to walk again. I had to learn basically how to do everything again. And, so from wheelchair, from totally being flat on my back to sitting up in a chair to being able to support my upper body, even to being able to roll over or change position in bed, that was a major milestone for me. The thing that I would stress, though, is that my case is pretty exceptional. It's not the norm.
And how long after the transplant did you decide to found your organization, My Heart, Your Hands?
We founded it in November of 2011. So that was a big decision, and it was, my co-founder is a survivor of Hodgkin's disease, and she was treated with radiation alone back in 1970. And her heart has been failing very slowly. She has actually, we were connected through the Cleveland Clinic through her persevering efforts to be connected with someone who had had a childhood cancer, had gone through transplant, and was on the other side. So the Cleveland Clinic connected us with one another, and we started to build a friendship in August of 2009, and she was listed in March of 2010 for transplant. And as we built this friendship, we just realized that we had lived remarkably similar lives, albeit parallel, but very, very similar and very different at the same time. But we had this common passion because we were reading studies that, from my professional life, I knew, having served the late effect population, that young adults are relatively under-informed about their risk factors for late effects. And so come November 2011, I was meeting with the transplant team, and I was telling them what my plans were. And I was so excited. I was like, I'm ready to go back to work. I'm ready to go back to being a nurse practitioner. I'm ready to go back into late effects and do what I do best. And they looked at me and they said, we had a conversation a long time ago, and you clearly don't remember it, but we will not recommend that you go back in to being a healthcare provider because of the infectious risk of, exposure to infections that you carry, because my immune system is slightly suppressed because of my rejection medication. So I was very disappointed because I love serving children and their families. And to me, it wasn't a job, it was a calling. And I had to grieve, I had to grieve a lot of losses. And that was one of them. And as I talked with Judy about the fact that my career was not going to be able to continue, we started batting around this idea of what if we founded a not-for-profit that ultimately could become, a major support to the survivorship population, especially adult survivors of childhood cancers. Certainly we have Livestrong out there. Livestrong is, once you get into Livestrong and into their organization, Livestrong is very much catered towards the adult survivorship population. You don't see a lot of stuff geared towards adults who had cancer as kids. So we're trying to fill that gap. We're building towards that.
And your website actually has some statistics. 40% of cancer survivors experience a life-threatening condition, and 70% of survivors will have a chronic health condition.
Yes. So 7 out of 10. And the overall statistic in kids with cancer is that 4 out of every 5 children diagnosed will join the ranks of the cured. 40% of those 4 children can expect to have some sort of a life-threatening condition. And that's where you have to balance this picture. They have the potential, and let me go back and rephrase that. They have the potential. We are all individuals. Each of our cancers is our own, and so each of our systems is going to take it and respond to it differently. That's the statistic, and it's stark, and it's frightening, and that's where you have to balance out a statistic that may or may not apply to you or your individual child. But I prefer to be informed rather than sucker punch. Not everybody prefers that. Some people would just prefer to deal with it, deny the fact that it exists and deal with it if it happens. But I think the thing I would say most is that I don't think there's a survivor out there who walks away from beating cancer without some collateral damage.
Regarding the future of cancer treatment, is there hope that this will eventually not be a part of the after effects of cancer treatment?
Absolutely. There is a researcher at the Cleveland Clinic. His name is Dr. Plana, and he's working on imaging technology that will detect changes to the heart while you are receiving therapy. And he has research out there that shows data that if cardiology works with oncology from the very beginning with this strain, it's called strain imaging, with the strain imaging technique, then cardiology can intervene with medication, and they are seeing reversal of the damage and hearts are being preserved. They're also looking at new combinations, trying to steer away from the drugs that are known to be particularly, culpable, particularly damaging to the heart. But right now we're kind of stuck between the rock and a hard place. We're getting there, but we're not there. The late effect is it's really hard to approach. I did it in my professional life a lot with kids and families. It's something that parents are aware of at the beginning. What's happening is the baton isn't being passed to the kids as they become adults. And so our mission is to educate and equip. Our mission is to also look at getting some changes made within the medical school curriculum so that as survivors become more and more common, medical providers know how to take care of them. And then thirdly, certainly I would be negligent if I did not also include in our mission to encourage people to register as organ donors, because greater than 90% of the citizens of the United States believe that organ donation is a good thing, a great thing. But only a third of them are actually registered. And I work daily with someone who is waiting and has been waiting, for over 3 years now, simply because people aren't translating belief into action. And we all know that any one of us could get in our car today and be killed. And yet our hearts, our lungs, our kidney, our liver, our corneas have so much potentially to offer an opportunity to live to other people.
Well, I'm not sure about some of my organs. They've seen a lot of wear and tear.
Well, mine have seen quite a lot of wear and tear too. But trust me, I will give what they will take. They decide. They're the experts. But I also want people not to be afraid of late effects, and it's a hard thing because it's a harsh reality that you could beat cancer and then end up with something else because of it. And if that something else is heart failure, that's ripping the worst Band-Aid off that you could. That's like throwing Epsom salt on a gaping wound. But I can tell you on the other side, my recovery was more from transplant. My recovery was the most challenging thing I have ever faced. But here I am. Today, my son turned 10 years old. He was five when I got my transplant. And he had only been 5 for 10 days. And that was one of my goals. I've got to live to see his 5th birthday. And 10 days into his 5th year, or 6th year, there we go. And there is hope and there is future, even when these things happen. Is it always going to end up like my story? Probably not, and I know not. But it can happen. And, I would really encourage people to take a look at the video, that we have up on Vimeo to get a sense of how well I am doing at this point, because I am a picture of death coming back to life.
The video on Vimeo, can that be found by searching for My Heart, Your Hands?
I think so, or you can go to our website and click on the Vimeo icon. It's down in the lower left-hand corner.
Okay, so there's a link on myheartyourhands.org.
Yeah.
Okay.
And there you can pick us up on Twitter, on Google+, on Facebook. We have a fan page. It's facebook.com/lateeffects. We'd appreciate support on that front. We get a lot of information out that way. So, yeah. And then we're working on, the biggest project that we have in the works. That's what we haven't talked about. The biggest project that we have in the works is a documentary film piece. And we are looking at documenting actual lives of real people who are facing various late effects. And one of those stories we are hoping will be my co-founder Judy's transplant. So we will be, we're actually getting ready to launch the sizzle reel up to Indiegogo to do the crowd raising for that. So certainly if anybody is interested in helping out with the fundraising for that, we would love that. This film piece is going to be used across media channels. It will be distributed traditionally and through all social media outlets as a means to educate and equip and make sure that every survivor who faces a late effect has the tools that they need and the care provided that they need. And Grammy lived with me for 6 months while I was sick with cancer. And I think that was just the richest gem of all.
That's right. I remember that now. That was a long time ago, though.
I know. Well, I remember you coming to visit. You may not.
I do remember, but what I mostly remember is that your older brother was playing the Steve Martin song King Tut. And he was trying to get me to dance around like an Egyptian. That's mostly what I remember.
I will get a kick out of that. Oh, my goodness. Yes. But, yeah, as a kid, I was so in the moment. And, cancer, when I look back on that experience, my parents have lived through a lot, having almost lost me twice. As have you guys, as my extended family. We've been through a lot, and we've all gone through it together. And, but to me, the biggest indication that it was something serious was that there was family everywhere all the time. And that was odd. That was not normal. We all met at Granny's house. Yep. Nobody met in Pittsburgh. So why would they come into Pittsburgh? And so I was like, something's up. But, they told me when I was ready to handle it. And I will forever be thankful. And then just lastly, my donor, her family, my hat goes off to them. I have a relationship with her father, an incredible, incredible family. And it was a struggle for them to make the decision. My donor designated on her, when she got her driver's license, that in the end, that she would be willing to be an organ donor. And of course, none of us at 16, when we're going in for that learner's permit, think that it's actually going to happen, But she checked it, and her dad has shared with me that when the organ donation team approached the family and told them, in the state of Ohio, even if a minor has designated that they want to be a donor, you still have to obtain parental consent, and that varies state by state. But her parents made the ultimate decision to honor what she had designated, and went forward with donating. And so I now carry her heart within me. You realize, and I think I realize this more and more as my friend and co-founder Judy, the longer she waits, because I essentially didn't wait. And the longer she waits, the more you realize that you're declining, that you sit and you think about the fact that someone's life is going to be lost in the process if you're given an opportunity to continue to live. And, I dealt with that after the transplant. Just thinking about the fact that someone's life was lost. You know, donors don't die for people. And you have to get that straight in your head, because you cannot carry, I think to try to carry the guilt that goes with that is incomprehensible. I'm forever thankful, and it's my hope that through this organization, her memory and who she was, because she was a great gal, my hope is that she will be honored and that her family will be pleased with the life that they gave me the opportunity to continue.
Did her family initially want to have any contact with you, or is that something that took some time?
Initially, no, they did not. And things are kept, the way transplant works is it's a no strings attached situation. So there is absolutely no obligation on the recipient side or the donor side to ever have any contact whatsoever. So there are people out there who have never talked with their donor families. And it's kept, I did not receive, I mean, you know me because we're family, so you know that, I mean, there was no way that I wasn't going to reach out and express my gratitude for the gift that they had given. But it was tricky. I was not willing to send that letter until I could accept the reality that they might not respond. And once I reached that point, I mean, I wrote a draft, 100 drafts within my head, sat down, put it on paper, and held on to it because it was right around the anniversary, the first year anniversary of her death. And I just couldn't intrude upon that day, with my letter arriving. But that letter goes through a third party who reviews it, lets the donor family know that if they want to receive it, they can. If they say yes, they send the letter. So I had sent a letter in June of 2009, and I did not hear from her dad until it was Labor Day weekend, 2010. So it was quite a while. It was 2.5 years. 2.5 years after the transplant that I heard from her father. And I knew I was going to love him right off the bat because he said, I couldn't send this letter until I reached the point that I really cared about how you were doing. And I thought, wow, I said, that's pretty honest. And and I lost it. I was like, I totally get that, because I would have understood if they didn't want to meet me or have a relationship of any sort with me. So, so it was a really neat letter to receive, and he and I keep in, I won't say frequent contact, but anytime we cross one another's mind, there's an outreach. We both hold a lot of anniversaries in common, and we certainly talk around those dates and things like that. And it's neat because it gives me an opportunity to get to know the person behind my heart, the person, her personality, who she was, what she loved to do, and things like that. But there's no obligation, and there is a waiting period, a recommended waiting period before you reach out.
Yeah, I couldn't imagine, contacting a family if I had gone through something like that. It just seems very emotionally intense.
Yeah, it is. And, you know, for the longest time, I had called they're called OPOs, Organ Procurement Agencies. I had called Lifeline of Ohio, because my case was rare. I mean, to have a Georgia girl, you know, life flighted to Ohio, and to receive a heart from a state resident of Ohio, it wasn't something that they were necessarily accustomed to doing, but that's the way it worked. And I said, you know, is there any way that you can tell me whether or not they received my letter? And they said, oh, yes, you could have called, you know, months ago to find that out. And the bereavement counselor said, yes, they did. Her father accepted your letter. And so at that point, I had also included a release. I said, you know, I'd like to be able to communicate with him without your involvement, because I know that you screen everything that I would write. And I don't filter myself a whole lot. I don't like to be filtered by other people. And I said, so can you please let them know that if they're open, I'm open. And so we, at that point, which was May of 2011, we exchanged contact information, and since that point in time, have been emailing, talking by phone, text messaging, and things like that.
Thank you for speaking here today.
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah, it's hard because we're family.